Welcome to the Finding the Magic podcast, where books come alive. I'm Tricia Copeland, a fiction author and host of this show. If you love books, finding great reads, and hearing about the story behind the story directly from the authors, this is the place for you. Whether you like fantasy, science fiction, dystopian, or romance titles, I think you'll find something to love in my playlist. Listen in to discover something magical about a book or two today.
Welcome, Alice.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Today we have Alice Ford. She is the author of Road to the Throne, a fantasy book. Jump in and tell us about this world, the characters. We want to know everything.
Yeah, so it's based on the Greek myths, but I took it from the early years of Zeus. So it's a bit of an origin story, if you like. And it looks at, how he came to take the throne of Olympus, and it looks at the very early myths of his young life. I've always been fascinated by Greek mythology, as I think a lot of people are. You see it all the time cropping up in books and media and stuff like that. But I think taking a step back and going to the beginning allowed me to explore something that hasn't been covered quite as much. And so it gave me a fresh take as a writer.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever thought of like an early life of one of these Greek gods and what that looks like. And if did they have an early life even, or did they just like ping into being, right?
Yes. I think Zeus particularly brings up a lot of strong emotions in people, one way or the other. So I think just seeing what he was like, or my interpretation of what he was like as, a teenager, it brings a fresh perspective as to why maybe he does some of the questionable things he does in his later life.
Interesting. So how did you come up with the idea for this book?
So I've always been interested in Greek mythology. I have Greek heritage, so it's sort of been a part of my life growing up. So it's something that I've always sort of been reading, always been consuming in one way or another. But I was reading the works of Hesiod, who's one of the very early Greek poets. And it was his work looking, because he looked at the Titans who were before the Olympians. He looked at Kronos and Rhea, who were Zeus's parents. And reading that just really sort of got things ticking in my brain. And I was like, oh, well, this is a side of things that I hadn't encountered before picking up that book. And it resonated with me. And I thought, well, if it resonates with me, maybe it will resonate with other people as well. But it just really got my creative juices flowing.
Fun. And is this your first book?
Yes, it is.
Congratulations. It's a big feat.
Yes.
Did you go to school? Were you trained in writing and creative literature or?
No. So I went to university and I studied psychology, actually, which I've done nothing with in my life since then. But I've always sort of been writing. I guess I'm what you would consider self-taught, for better or worse. I've always written. I don't remember a time in my life when I wasn't writing in some capacity. It wasn't always novels, but I was always coming up with stories from very early years.
Fun. And do you read a lot of the fantasy genres? What is your favorite thing to read?
I do read a lot. It really does depend on my mood. I'm one of those people, I'll pick up something different depending on how I'm feeling. I think if we're talking about favorite authors, it's Jane Austen. I find myself constantly going back to her books. I enjoy reading them. They're probably what I read most frequently. I also enjoy a lot of non-fiction work as well. So I enjoy reading like historical non-fiction and stuff like that as well. So I'm not just a fantasy genre, although that is what I prefer to write. When it comes to reading, I'm all sorts.
Interesting. Well, what do you think? Where do you think you go from here? Do you have another Zeus book in the works?
I've got some ideas rattling around in terms of Zeus and sort of like what happens next. But I think the one I'm working on another book at the moment, and it's a different story altogether. It's a different type of fantasy. It's very early days, but yeah, I've got a few things, as I feel like every author does. There's a few things on the go at the same time.
Right. Well, I don't want you to give too much away about your book, but how far does this book take Zeus's life? Is he on the throne, the head of the gods at the end, or?
Yes. So by the end of the book, no spoilers. Well, try not to give any spoilers. The book finishes with the final battle for Olympus. So it rounds off the war that he was fighting to get to the throne. In my book, they're not gods, they are magical creatures, but that they don't consider themselves as gods. And I sort of wanted it as maybe that's the way that humanity interpreted these stories when they heard about these fantastical beings and their magical powers. They put the title of god onto them rather than that's how the characters themselves view themselves.
Yeah, that's interesting because if you're just yourself and there's nobody else in the world, right? How can you really see yourself as a god?
Yeah.
Interesting. And so do you incorporate a lot of his family? Does he have siblings? How does that work?
Yes. So I pull on inspiration from the myths quite a bit. I put my own spin on it, and obviously the story I like to think is unique. But certainly his family, his parents are in it. His grandmother Gaia is in it. She plays quite a pivotal role, and his siblings, and all of that. It was quite difficult because Greek myths, they're all related to each other, very strongly. And so I have sort of stepped away from that a little bit just to try and create more of a world building, like a lived in society, whereas they don't all have a single point of origin. They're not all brother and sister. And so there is a little bit of divergence in terms of how they're related to each other, but they are all still sort of like the main characters you'll see in the book.
Interesting. So how long did it take you to form the story and get this written?
So I think I had the story done pretty quickly. That came very easily to me. Getting it into a book and getting it formatted and everything, and sort of filling in all the holes and between the sort of main scenes and that lot, that took a bit longer. Altogether, I think I've been working on this book on and off for close to 10 years. I did take a couple of years out. I had a big old life event, and I took about 3 years out of writing. And then when I picked it back up again, that's when I was really like, right, let's sit down, let's do this, let's get this book published. And from that point, it was about 18 months of like really hard graft after I took that break.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if this was a 10-year span, obviously it was a passion of yours and wasn't just like, oh, a passing, I think I'm interested in this. That shows a lot of grit and stamina there.
Yes. I think when I started, it was a, for me, piece of work. I never really thought, let's publish it, let's get it out there. It was just a, hey, this is a story that's in my head, let's get it on paper. And then when I came back to it, I was like, you know what, let's just do it. What's the worst that could happen? Let's get it out there.
That is so fun. I love that. So you have some other projects too. Tell me about your Patreon projects.
Yeah. So I do a lot of short stories on my Patreon. I go under Fallen Rose Writing when I'm working on my Patreon. I publish under Alice Ford, but my side projects and my Instagram and everything is under Fallen Rose Writing. I stick with fantasy, but I do jump about with the subgenres. So I do like modern, I do horror, I do romance, and I just sort of play around with that. And I think one of the joys of short stories is you can just get them out really quickly. You can get your idea down onto paper, and then you can just send them out into the world, which is a really enjoyable thing to do.
Yeah, so for people who aren't familiar with that system or that site, tell us a little bit more about it.
So What it is it's a bit like a website in that I post content, and there are sort of memberships. They're called tiers on Patreon. You can have a free membership, or there's various paid ones, and as you go up the tiers, you get more content. So some people are very you sign up, you post your content, and you sort of set the tiers and how much people pay for it, like a subscription. And some people are very stingy with what they give on the free stuff, but I put a lot of stuff on the free tier, so you can sign up. It's not going to cost you anything, and you will get short stories. You'll get behind the scenes of my books, both the one that's been published, Road to the Throne, and some of my work in progress. I've got a blog that I have started as well, that deals with like sort of representation and mental health, and how it can be portrayed in fantasy books, and why it should be portrayed in fantasy books, in my opinion. And so you get to really dig deep into how I work and what I've got to offer.
Interesting. Thank you for explaining that. And talk to me about mental health and fantasy stories, because I have a fae fantasy series that I'm publishing the finale of next month. But the way this idea came to me is somebody had advertised an anthology for authors to submit short stories, fantasy stories, all of whom the main characters dealt with mental health, some type of mental health issue. And I wrote my story, I submitted it, and I think that it just fell apart. Like, they never did it. But that's kind of what booted my idea for this fae or fairy series that I wrote. So how do you think that looks, and how do you think that works?
I think it's really important, all sorts of representation across the board. I think it is something that we're getting better at as a society, I believe, but there's still, I think, a lot of work to do. I think everyone deserves to be seen and respected in whatever media they consume. And I think a lot of the time representation has a history of being used as a gimmick or a joke or an obligation, like ticking a diversity box, so to speak. But I think when it's written from a place of passion, it really does shine through. And it doesn't have to be big. It can be a side character. It can be sort of mentioned but never named, so to speak. But I think just having a wider range of characters and that representation on the pages just makes for better stories and makes for more interesting stories as well.
Yeah, and what are some of the characters you've created?
Pardon, sorry?
Who are some of the characters that you created?
So I've got obviously loads of, in terms of Road to the Throne, I've got loads of characters that are drawn from the myths. I've sprinkled in a few sort of made up ones that I've just come up with off the top of my head. But there's, all sorts of, there's such a wide range of characters to choose from the myths. And I think some of them will be very recognizable, as that's sort of the character that they've always been and they've always been portrayed as. I think for some of them, I've tried to put a different spin on them, like Zeus. It's difficult to write Zeus as a likable character. I'm going to be honest, but I've done my best with him, and then just putting that different spin on some of those other characters as well, just to see things from a different perspective, and maybe dig down into the root of their character flaws and everything.
Okay, so yeah, I guess my question was more to this perspective of mental health challenges in characters.
Yeah. So there's, again, not trying to put too many spoilers out there, but there's some grief that's dealt with and the grieving process. There's diversity in terms of gender identity. I thought, I'm writing Greek myths. Why do I need to be confined by, society's modern days rules of gender? So that there's a fluidity there. And I've got people who deal with sort of various abuse and stuff like that, and sometimes they deal with it in a healthy way, and sometimes they deal with it in a not so healthy way. And I think it's important to show all aspects of that sort of thing, and ultimately just to give it the respect it deserves. Like, some people might make bad choices and they might do things that ultimately aren't for the greater good, but give it the respect that it deserves, because it is how some people live their lives, and you can't ridicule them for that.
Interesting. Yeah. So do you usually have character arcs where these characters have some sort of awareness or growth in them, or sometimes they're just kind of on the side and that's what we see?
Yeah, a bit of both, sprinkled in a bit of both. I think sometimes it's good just to have it as background characters, just because, you know, that's part of the world as well, and not every, you know, it's not always the main character or a centralized figure that is dealing with their own problems, and then also like having that arc. And as I said, I think for me the most important thing is being respectful about it. Like, they may not get healed, but the people around them are respectful and understanding, and I think that is where the most important sort of in terms of representation comes from.
Yeah, I love that thought of like life happens even in fantasy stories, right? And sometimes they're like a safer space to deal with those emotions. Um, I mean, I guess a Hallmark movie can help you deal with emotions too, but you know, having a vampire or a god or whatever different characters in there kind of maybe gives it a little more lightness or
Yeah, yes. I think if it's sort of like a story, some people are more willing to engage with it, whereas if it's a real person, it can make some people uncomfortable or just unsure of how to react. But when it's a very sort of like obviously made up person, it can be a little bit easier. And I think also it can expose people to things that they would never sort of encounter knowingly in their everyday life. Like, people can not realize that this is what some people go through, or this is how some people live their lives. And it's just a really good way of opening that door and starting the discussion for a lot of people, I think.
yeah, because sometimes, yeah, you may not have been exposed to someone that has been through that experience or is living that experience, and then that might prepare you for something that's going to happen in the future, and just having a level of understanding, respect, and giving
Yeah.
people grace, right?
Yes, very important.
And in this case, even the gods, but we'll debate that once we read the book, right? Well, thank you so much for being here. We look forward to your next work. Tell everyone where we can find you and your books.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. So, Instagram, Facebook, and Patreon, it's all Fallen Rose Writing. And I am going to start a TikTok as well, which will be Fallen Rose Writing. But my ring light just broke literally about half an hour ago. So I'm going to have to get a new one before I get started on that. But yeah, Instagram, Facebook, and Patreon at the moment are my main platforms.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Alice Ford, you author of Road to the Throne, and we will welcome you back when you publish your next book.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Finding the Magic podcast. I'm your host, author and podcaster Tricia Copeland, and I love getting behind the scenes. If you like the podcast, make sure to subscribe and stop in each week to discover new authors and books. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep finding the magic.